Hey, how you doing? Welcome back to another episode of Rise Records. I'm Riley, and this is the podcast where I delve into my favorite records and explain the stories behind them. Now, before I get started today, I just wanted to say a quick apology to everyone for the delay in this episode coming out. I had a problem with my internet connection. It somehow disconnected itself, something to do with a faulty wire or something. And I just got it fixed this morning, actually, so it's been about a week since I have had any proper internet. But we are back now, and I am ready to get this thing back on the rails. So, without any further ado, today we are traveling back to December 1965 when the Beatles released Rubber Soul, an album that not only redefined what pop could be, but cracked open the door to psychedelia, setting the stage for the Summer of Love and everything that followed afterwards. So, over the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to walk you through the history and do a track by track of Rubber Soul, exploring how each song hinted at new sonic landscapes, lyrical depths, and cultural possibilities. Let's start off by going back to late 1965. The Beatles were restless, they had conquered the charts, toured the world, and turned pop into a global phenomenon. But with Rubber Soul, released that December, they did something far more radical. They began to reinvent what an album could be. Up until this point, Beatles records were mostly collections of singles padded with covers or quick studio cuts. Rubber Soul was different. For the first time, the band saw the album as a unified artistic statement. The songs were recorded in just over a month, but the results sounded like nothing else in pop at the time. So, what made it so groundbreaking? Well, a big part of the story is influence. Bob Dylan's lyrical honesty and marijuana offerings pushed John and Paul to write with more depth and more introspection. American folk rock, especially the Byrds, gave George new guitar textures to experiment with. And most importantly, George's growing fascination with Indian music brought an entirely new sound world into the Beatles' orbit. That fascination showed up most clearly in Norwegian Wood, where George played sitar on a Beatles track for the very first time. That one instrument, shimmering and unfamiliar to Western pop ears, cracked open the door to psychedelia. Suddenly, rock wasn't just about guitars and drums, it was about the whole world's musical palette. But it wasn't only instrumentation. Songs like Nowhere Man shifted away from boy meets girl themes to tackle loneliness and existential searching. The Word framed love not just romantically, but as a kind of cosmic truth, and In My Life used the studio itself as an instrument, with George Martin speeding up a piano part to sound like a harpsichord, which I think is one of the Beatles' earliest studio experiments that foreshadowed the sonic playfulness of psychedelia. So the album kicks off with Drive My Car. On the surface, it's playful and cheeky, full of bluesy guitar riffs. But underneath it's already signaling some kind of shift. The Beatles aren't singing about holding hands anymore. They're telling ironic, tongue-in-cheek stories like this one in the second verse. I told that girl that my prospects were good. She said, baby, it's understood. Working for peanuts is all very fine, but I can show you a better time. That sense of irony and character-based narrative would soon become a hallmark of psychedelic lyrics. Also, just quickly, a fun fact about this song. It was the first song I ever played with a full band outside of high school. We played it as the opening number in our set at the local fair in November of 2018. I was on rhythm guitar and lead vocals, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I'm pretty sure that I also forgot an entire verse, and I kind of freaked out. I wasn't really sure what to do. So I just kept singing the chorus, I think. I'm kind of glad that my memory's hazy on it, because it's one of those like cringy things, you know. But anyway, after Drive My Car, we have Norwegian Wood. This is the moment that changed everything. George Harrison's sitar, borrowed from his growing fascination with Indian classical music, gave Western pop listeners their first taste of raga. Suddenly, pop wasn't just guitars and drums. It was a global experiment. Psychedelia would then take this idea and run with it. John Lennon wrote this song as a somewhat veiled account of an extramarital affair he had in London, which was immortalized in the opening line, I once had a girl, or should I say, she once had me. Now this song for me was always a landmark of just 60s folk rock in general, because it's so iconic, that guitar riff, which is what you heard at the start of this podcast, or my interpretation of it at least. Whenever I would put it on, I immediately got images of like the 60s landscape and, you know, the 60s living rooms and the 60s fashion. For some reason, that's absolutely not what the song is about at all, but that's just what comes to mind when I listen. So, it's always just been one of my favorites. I love that one. You Won't See Me follows with a Motown kind of groove. Paul's biting lyrics and the swelling harmonies stretch the pop format. The song's length, which is almost 4 minutes, was unusual for the time, showing that the band wasn't afraid to push beyond radio's expectations. This song is about a crisis in Paul's relationship with then-girlfriend Jane Asher, who was refusing to comply with McCartney's wishes that she stay at home and put his interests first. He sings, "When I call you up, your line's engaged. I have had enough, so act your age. We have lost the time that was so hard to find, and I will lose my mind if you won't see me." Paul later said that it was shattering to be without her, which I suppose you can hear through his words here, and I really do think you can. One of John Lennon's first pieces of real introspective writing comes up next with Nowhere Man. This is perhaps, I think, the clearest bridge into psychedelia's inception. It's not about love at all, it's about alienation, detachment, and real soulful existential searching. John Lennon's lyrical voice here would inspire countless psychedelic bands to explore inner space just as much as outer. I mean, the lyrics honestly speak for themselves. He's a real nowhere man, sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody. Doesn't have a point of view, knows not where he's going to. Isn't he a bit like you and me? I'll admit that this song is one of the ones that really actually made me look inside myself and come to terms with who I am as a person. And I suppose in that case, I'm a nowhere man. But I always kind of gravitated towards this one because I understood what John was talking about. So up next we have Think For Yourself, which brings in a fuzz bass, and I think this was the first time a bass had ever been recorded via a fuzz box, if I'm not mistaken. This in turn brought a distorted and almost abrasive tone that foreshadows the experimental textures of the psychedelic era. George's lyrics are sharp and critical, another step away from the classic boy meets girl simplicity. For example, "I left you far behind the ruins of the life that you had in mind, and though you still can't see, I know your mind's made up, you're gonna cause more misery." It's always invited interpretation as both a political statement and a love song, as I think George dismisses a lover or friend in a tone that somehow likens to Bob Dylan's 1965 Positively 4th Street, which I recently just discovered for myself, and that is one of the best songs I've ever heard. I'm starting to really get into Bob Dylan. I think I might do an episode about him later. I've got a few artists on the list, so I'll just add him onto the bottom there. The Word is up next, and it's an anthem disguised as a love song. When Lennon sings, "Say the word and you'll be free," he's treating love as a universal force, like it's almost spiritual. Talking about the song, he said, "The word is all about getting smart. It's the marijuana period. It's the love and peace thing. The word is love, right? It seems like the underlying theme to the universe. Everything that was worthwhile got down to this one love thing." This theme of love as cosmic energy would become a central pillar in the psychedelic culture. And then comes the sweeping beauty that is Michelle to close side one. A tender acoustic ballad, Paul McCartney conceived this song in the late 1950s, but during writing sessions for Rubber Soul, John added a brand new middle eight, part of which was actually taken from Nina Simone's cover of "I Put a Spell on You." The French phrases in the lyrics emphasize a language barrier that separates the two lovers in the story, and the narrative conveys an acceptance that their relationship is most likely doomed to fail, such that the singer is already looking back on what could have been. These French lines, however, mix cultural flavors, and this cosmopolitan approach reflects this era's growing openness, which psychedelia would fully embrace later on. Side 2 opens with the Ringo-led "What Goes On." Originally written by John, it's Ringo's country shuffle moment, and probably the least psychedelic track. But even here, the Beatles are blending the genres of country, rock, and pop into one. The lyrics here display the lover's deceit as shown through these lines. "The other day I saw you as you walked along the road, but when I saw him with you, I could feel my future fold. It's so easy for a girl like you to lie. Tell me why." It's easy to understand why this song is perhaps one of the more underrated Beatles tracks. I think when people talk about Rubber Soul, I'm not really sure if What Goes On is getting, I don't want to say the appreciation it deserves, because I'm, in the most respectful way possible, I'm not sure if it deserves appreciation. That sounds really mean to say, but when you compare it to the rest of the album, what comes before and after, I think it's pretty easy to overlook it. The next track, John Lennon's "Girl," is much darker and more introspective. Lennon said he wrote the song about the kind of woman he wanted and would eventually find, I suppose, in Yoko Ono. The musical arrangement here is light and I suppose old-fashioned in a sense, with acoustic guitars in a simple slow beat. The lyrics are some of the most melancholic of the Beatles' earlier love songs, however. For example, when I think of all the times I've tried so hard to leave her, she will turn to me and start to cry. And she promises the earth to me and I believe her. After all this time, I don't know why. Fun fact, the sides between when John sings girl in the chorus are widely interpreted as him taking a hit from a marijuana joint, which is absolutely not surprising at all considering the turn that the album takes. But anyway, the somber melody, John's allusions to pain and his modest questioning here all anticipate the psychedelic fascination with complexity, melancholy, and self-reflection. I'm Looking Through You comes next, a song written by Paul about disillusionment and another one about his estrangement from Jane Asher. The lyrics from the first verse suggest that the woman portrayed has changed on the inside while they were apart and the man no longer recognizes her as she once was, therefore further increasing the unfortunate separation between them. I'm looking through you, where did you go? I thought I knew you, what did I know? You don't look different, but you have changed. I'm looking through you, you're not the same. This song plays with shifting tempos and subtle changes from acoustic-based verses to harsh R&B breaks that make the listener feel slightly off balance. That sense of instability is exactly what psychedelia thrives on. John Lennon's remarkable piece, In My Life, marks another watershed. John looks back at memory and mortality here. There are places I'll remember all my life, though some have changed. Some forever, not for better. Some have gone, and some remain. All these places had their moments with lovers and friends I still can recall. Some are dead and some are living. In my life, I've loved them all. This is where I'm going to get a little personal with you all, just for a moment, so bear with me. My nan was a big Beatles fan, and it was only in the last few years of her life that I became a pretty big Beatles fan myself. We never really spoke about them or their music and the impact it had on us like I wanted us to. At her funeral last year, In My Life was played over the slideshow of photos of her life, and it was only then that I felt the full impact of John's writing. The tears flowed like endless rain, and ever since I've never been able to listen to this song without thinking of her, and just how absolutely wonderful she was. How she'd light up a room with that cheeky smile, and poke people with jokes, and glass of red wine in hand, you know. I do think of old friends and lovers too, but Nan will always be my first thought, and I miss and love her dearly. Moving on now to Wait, which might feel like a leftover from earlier sessions compared to the rest of the album, but its urgent rhythm and layered harmonies add to the sense that the Beatles were constantly expanding their sonic space. The lyrics here describe an anxious build-up to an eventual lovers' reunion. Wait till I come back to your side, we'll forget the tears we cried. I feel as though you ought to know that I've been good as I can be, and if you do, I'll trust in you and know that you will wait for me. In my opinion, this is one of the more underrated tunes on the album. I think it's on par with Ringo's What Goes On, and it's easy to see why it's easily forgotten, just like that one, considering what came before, In My Life, and afterwards, which was George Harrison's If I Needed Someone. And it's really George's raga rock moment. If I Needed Someone was written as a love song to Pattie Boyd, the English model who he was engaged to come the album's release and who he later married. Built on a droning 12-string Rickenbacker guitar riff inspired by Roger McGuinn of the Byrds and Indian classical music. It's one of the clearest foreshadowings of psychedelic rock's swirling, hypnotic textures. The detached tone in the lyrics has raised a lot of interpretations though, as some call it a rain check of a love song, directed to the right person at the wrong time. The lyrics also seem to address all the women in the world, saying that had he, George, met them earlier, it might have worked out, but now he was too much in love. But give him your number just in case. Finally, we have Run For Your Life, written by John based on one of Elvis Presley's early singles, Baby Let's Play House. John actually retained a line from this song, I'd rather see you dead, little girl, than to be with another man, which I thought was quite destructive. That is such a bitey, edgy, almost like garage rock type harder edge of a lyric. And I think it foreshadows the jealousy type of vibe that John was writing and singing in the Imagine album with Jealous Guy. So when fans dropped the needle on Rubber Soul, they were hearing more than a new Beatles record. They were hearing the boundaries of pop music stretch and warp. Within a year, the Beatles would push even further with Revolver and then explode into full Technicolor with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Magical Mystery Tour. But the first spark, the moment where the straight lines of pop began to bend and swirl into something psychedelic, started right here with Rubber Soul. Well, that's all I've got time for on this episode of Rise Records. If you've enjoyed this journey through Rubber Soul and the birth of psychedelia, please make sure to like, follow, share, and feel free to let me know what your favorite track from the album is. I would love to hear from you. I hope you'll join me again next week for a special in-depth look at the songwriting in not just one, but two albums that hold a very unexpected special place in my heart. Those two being Taylor Swift's Folklore and Evermore. So, until the needle drops again, bye for now.